The Democrats had a major upset in the Senate elections. Are you aware of the deep American crisis behind it? Can you sense it? Actually, America's at a pretty dangerous moment right now. What should everyone do, or what can they do at this time? This is a discussion Fang Wei is bringing to you today. Also, there are rumors that Trump will fire Secretary of War Hegseth. Is that true? What is the basis for this news? And what are the actual facts? Okay, what about the US-Canada trade talks originally set to end today? The US wants to impose a 50% tariff on Canada. Will it start today? Welcome to Good Morning America, brought to you by Fang Wei. Hello to our YouTube viewers and Sound of Hope Silicon Valley FM 96.1 listeners. So the Democratic Socialists, or DSA member, who is also a Florida State Representative, Angie Nixon. In Tuesday's primary, that's yesterday's primary, for the U.S. Senate seat, she pulled off a major upset in the Democratic primary, defeating her opponent, Alexander Wiederman, 56% to 44%, a double-digit win. With a lead of 12 percentage points, it was a landslide victory. This is particularly worth discussing, as there's a lot of deep meaning behind it. Okay, before we dive into that, let's mention a few other elections. Florida Governor DeSantis is term limited, so he can't run for re-election. So the new Florida gubernatorial candidate endorsed by Trump, Byron Donalds, won the nomination. If he wins in November, he'll be Florida's first black governor. He's currently a U.S. representative. Also, current Florida U.S. Representative Corey Mills lost his primary to former TV anchor Ryan Elisha, mainly due to his scandal-ridden ethics investigation. Trump did endorse him, but even that couldn't save him, so Trump has already said he's switching his support to Ryan Elisha. So for Trump-endorsed candidates, over 95% usually succeed, but sometimes he misses, and this was one of those misses. Also, in Alaska, in the northwest corner of the U.S., in the Democratic and Republican primary, Alaska is unique because they have a nonpartisan primary where the top four advance. In that 16-candidate top four primary, former Democratic Representative Mary Peltola is leading incumbent Republican Senator Dan Sullivan 46.8% to 44.4%. As you know, Sullivan has the incumbency advantage, yet he's trailing Peltola. However, a primary lead doesn't guarantee a general election win because in Alaska, the Republican vote is currently split among 16 candidates. But this Peltola in 2022 relied on what's called ranked choice voting, to defeat the then Republican incumbent in the House. So she's the candidate the Democrats are counting on this year, one of the few with a real shot at flipping a seat in a deep red state. Alaska is a deep red state, after all, to take back a Senate seat. This Peltola has a relatively moderate political stance, so even in Republican-heavy Alaska, she isn't really disliked. That's why this is a race very much worth watching on the national Senate election map on November 3rd. All right, let's get back to the biggest highlight of Tuesday's primary, which is the U.S. Senate race in Florida, and the major news revealed behind it. Let's talk about this position first. We all know this seat is actually Marco Rubio's seat. After he transitions to Secretary of State in 2025, Governor DeSantis appointed the state's Attorney General, Ashley Moody, to take over. Now, this gives the Democrats a glimmer of hope to snatch this seat, because if Rubio were running for re-election, the Democrats would have absolutely no chance at all. Because in 2016, as you remember, Rubio resigned from the Senate to run for president, and after losing to Trump, he went back to reclaim his Senate seat, and in just a few months, he had it back. So for him, winning that Senate seat was like taking candy from a baby. But now, he's already moved on to be Secretary of State. So while Ashley Moody was appointed, her time in the role has been very short. So for the Democrats, there's a glimmer of hope now. So who are the two candidates the Democrats are putting forward? One is named Vindman. This Vindman has the Democratic Party's endorsement, and his fundraising has reached $16 million. Who's his opponent? It's, as I just mentioned, Angie Nixon. She's with the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. How much money did she raise? $970,000. So at 60 to 1, there's just no comparison. Not only does her funding fall short of Vindman's, but Nixon's national name recognition is also far behind his. Vindman is a U.S. Army lieutenant colonel who fought in Iraq, was later wounded by a roadside bomb, and was awarded the Purple Heart. Later, he went to serve in Trump 1.0, serving in the White House during the first Trump administration. He got a master's in Russian and East European studies from Harvard, and then a PhD from Johns Hopkins. And then in 2018, he served as the director for European affairs on the White House National Security Council, but was dismissed for criticizing Trump, criticizing the big boss. After being dismissed, he became anti-Trump, even testifying in Trump's impeachment trial. He even sued Trump Jr. and Giuliani. At the same time, he wrote a book that reached number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list. So it's his memoir. So he's a well-known figure nationally and a very prominent anti-Trump figure within the Democratic Party. So he far exceeds his opponent in both funding and national recognition. Who is your opponent? This person's named Angie Nixon. Angie Nixon is a labor activist. She used to be a congressional aide and later joined a labor union. Then in 2020, she ran for the Florida House of Representatives and won. As you can see, it says, legislators serve the people, not your party. That means serving the people, not your party. That sounds great, but sometimes, in America, serving the people versus serving the country is quite different. Anyway, she's a socialist. During the redistricting in Florida, she was shouting with a megaphone in the House chamber, which, violates House rules. So in May, the House voted to formally censure her. But she didn't care. She said, I don't care, I'm going to speak my mind. So it's a bit like those Red Guards, challenging the existing order. So who endorsed her? Democratic U.S. representatives like Frost, Ilhan Omar, Tlaib, and Presley. Basically, the squad in Congress, the Democratic Socialists, they all support her. In a July poll by the University of North Florida, Weideman was leading Nixon by 15 percentage points. But at that time, 36% of voters were undecided. The final result was a total reversal. Angie Nixon not only won, but by a double-digit margin of 12%. So, to some extent, it shows that national name recognition and fundraising ability no longer equate to votes in Democratic primaries. Now, let's look at the Republican side. The incumbent Attorney General, Ashley Moody, easily won with 80% of the vote. So on October 3rd, Ashley Moody will face off against Angie Nixon. Looking at the polls or the odds now, in a red state like Florida, Moody has a very high chance of winning. But Angie Nixon's victory was a huge upset, highlighting the changes within the Democratic Party. We mentioned a few days ago that on August 17th, CBS News and YouGov conducted a joint poll. In that poll of over 2,000 people, 58% of Democrats identified with socialism, while only 18% did not. Among Democrats with a college degree or higher, 71% identified with socialism and only 16% did not. So many people's first impression of this poll was that it must be wrong, just a total mess. But then again, is this poll really untrustworthy? We all know that polls can be unreliable, including those from CBS and YouGov. But historically, it's mostly polls about Trump that are unreliable. Why would they fake results about themselves? So there's really no reason to say this poll is untrustworthy, as there isn't enough evidence. Plus, the sample size was over 2,200 people, which is double the size of a typical poll. So, of course, the larger the sample size, the more accurate the results will be, right? Okay, so assuming the polls are credible, the next question is, how did the Democratic Party end up like this? In the U.S. Democratic Party, 71% of those with a college degree or higher think socialism is good. Is this still America? So, of course, I think the conclusion isn't hard to guess. These people were in school and were truly led astray by the schools. That's one aspect of it. But on the other hand, a very realistic aspect is that young people today are truly struggling. In other words, it's the issue of affordability that Newt Gingrich emphasized the Republican Party must prioritize. Let me give you some data on this. For Americans born in the 1940s, 90% of them earned more than their parents by the time they were 30. What does that mean? It means 90% of people back then were doing better than the previous generation. Now, for those born in the 1980s, the Reagan era, only 50% earned more than their parents at age 30. That means only half were doing better than the previous generation. And now it's even lower, well below 50%. But exactly how much? We don't have the specific figures yet. But let's look at another related metric, the home price to income ratio. What is the home price to income ratio? It's the ratio of a house, the single-family home, to your annual income. Data from the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies shows the national ratio was 4-to-1 in 2019, meaning if your income was $100,000, your house was $400,000. That's the idea. Just 3 years later, after the pandemic, it rose to 5.6 times. So with a $100,000 income, the house prices jumped to $560,000. That's the situation. This is an all-time high, and the result is that young people, young Americans, can't afford to buy homes now. Now, the latest data says the median age for first-time home buyers, and what's the median? It means 50% are above it and 50% are below it. Well, that median age is now 40 years old. I don't know about our viewers. How old were you when you bought your first home? Feel free to leave a comment, okay? I'd like to see what everyone's experience was like. I bought my house back in 1997. I bought my home, I was 29 years old. So if you have to wait until 40 to buy your first one, and this is for a first-time purchase, not a second or third home, wow, that's really, really tough. Because for Americans, a home is the American dream. It's the symbol of that dream. Our viewers in the US can leave a comment, and those abroad can share too. How old were you when you bought your first home, your very first house? Okay, and another data point is the mortgage burden as a percentage of income. Before the pandemic, it was 20%, meaning if you brought home $100,000, $20,000 went to the house for the mortgage. Now it's over 30%, so you're paying $30,000. The burden of housing is much heavier. A U.S. Census Bureau report for 2025 says that for young Americans aged 25 to 34 who've entered the workforce, they've moved out, have jobs, are married, and have kids. These four ratios, this is the proportion of a complete family. From 45% in 1975, it dropped to less than 25% in 2024. So it can be said that young people are indeed not living as well as their parents' generation did. So what young people feel is one thing, and what is it? It's called the wealth gap. And the wealth gap is the most effective way for the Communist Party to come to power in almost any country. Because they won't think that much, you know. If there's a wealth gap, they'll want change. But there's another point here. A wealth gap alone isn't enough to subvert a social system. It also depends on how that gap is explained. For example, with the emergence of AI, it could potentially lead to widespread unemployment and a certain form of wealth disparity. Of course, if you ask Elon Musk, he'd say no. Society will reach a state of great abundance where no one has to work. I don't quite agree with that. But regardless, if the rise of AI leads to job losses, does that have anything to do with the American national system? I don't think so. Or at least there's no direct connection, right? But it can be interpreted by so-called interested parties as the society being unfair to you. When there's a wealth gap, it's because society is unfair, so they'll just overthrow it and start over, no matter what. So think about it. It's not just about actual wealth gaps. Take the rise of the feminist movement in the 60s. Let me briefly explain. We know that after World War II, the United States economy saw unprecedented prosperity, and American women then were actually quite happy raising families. That was a very typical nuclear family back then, with the husband working and the wife at home, and people loved having children. Then, in the 1960s, many young women were provoked by the socialists or communists of that time who whispered in their ears, "Why should your husband work outside? It's unfair to women." So don't think you're happy. You need to realize you're actually very unhappy. Because compared to men, you don't have the rights they have, you don't earn as much money, and you can't do many of the things they can do. So you're unhappy, but you could be happier. They literally provoked the rise of feminism out of thin air when there was no real issue. Of course, with education and the media fanning the flames and making things worse, people started feeling a sense of injustice. So starting in the 60s, American women did leave the home, and one result was dual-income households where no one looked after the kids. Nowadays, of course, if I say this, everyone thinks, well, a family obviously needs two incomes. But you have to realize, in 1950s America, it wasn't like that. Man worked, the woman stayed home, the roles were clearly defined. When women all started working, it led to a surge in divorce rates and broken families. These are modern American problems, and they're all related. I'm not saying men and women should be unequal, quite the opposite. I firmly believe in equality between men and women, but equality through differentiation, where men and women each play to their strengths to achieve a general equality. If women have to do everything men do, is that really equality? Isn't that just against common sense, right? Men and women are naturally different, each with their own strengths. Okay, let's get back to the issue of the wealth gap. Faced with a certain wealth gap, if an inflammatory explanation is added, people will change and demand a change in the social system, even if that system has little to do with the current disparity. So, I'll give you two examples. As you know, in December 1998, Hugo Chavez was elected president of Venezuela, starting the country down the path of socialism. During his campaign, did he run under the banner of socialism? I'm telling you, did he? No, not at all. At that time, Venezuela was also seeing a widening gap between the rich and the poor. During the election, his three main demands were to abolish the old political system, wipe out corruption, and eliminate poverty. His core platform was to convene a constituent assembly, rewrite the Constitution, and establish the Fifth Republic. He packaged his ideology as what he called Bolivarianism. But he was a 19th century South American independence hero, Simon Bolivar. He was a nationalist who never mentioned Marx. He even gave moderate assurances to the world that he wouldn't follow a Marxist path. And the result? We all know what happened. Actually, regarding Castro in Cuba, do you think it was a communist rebellion or uprising that took power? No, it was also because of the widening wealth gap in Cuba at the time. In July 1957, Castro wrote his guerrilla manifesto in the Sierra Maestra Mountains. He promised that if he took power, he would hold free elections within a year, restore the 1940 Constitution, implement land reform, and confiscate the property of corrupt officials. In short, a program of restoring constitutionalism plus social reform was a typical stance of Latin American nationalist reformers at the time. There wasn't a single word about communism or socialism in it. But in 1959, after Castro took power in January, he visited the U.S. in April. On NBC's Meet the Press, he publicly said, "I am not a communist," and emphasized that the revolution was humanistic, not communist. So this footage remains a key historical record for studying him, showing how he lied at that critical moment. He went to D.C. and New York, deliberately projecting a moderate image so the U.S. wouldn't try to, topple his newly seized regime. We all know that before the Chinese Communist Party took power, they also promoted something called New Democracy. Back then they said, "Chiang Kai-shek, you're a dictator. We communists are the true democracy." So, in the end, we've seen what happened to these three countries. After the lies were told, the communists took over, leading to the state they're in today. So, the wealth gap exists, and when you add incitement and provocation, it eventually leads to a dangerous place. The wealth gap in the U.S. exists now, it really does, but it's not that large, nowhere near that large. Let me show you a chart. This is from a Chinese media outlet reporting a 17.9% unemployment rate among young people. This is from Tencent News, citing the National Bureau of Statistics. In July, the urban unemployment rate for the labor force aged 16 to 24, excluding students, was 18%. Okay, such a high unemployment rate, yet it's handled very calmly in China. Why? Because China explains it as seasonal unemployment. What does that mean? It means that when summer comes, the unemployment rate will climb. What's the point of that? Is that even considered a career? It's just temporary work, isn't it? So with an unemployment rate this high, things would have descended into chaos long ago in the US. But in China, there's no unrest because the government and the media explain it away as normal and no big deal. So social reality is one thing, but the understanding and interpretation of it are just as important. If a nation or a people has no awareness or understanding of the origins, legitimacy, and scope of its social system, it's even more dangerous, as it can easily be misinterpreted to the point of collapse. So right now is what we call the pre-collapse moment for America. Currently, the power of interpretation regarding the wealth gap, feminism, and all these things pushed by what's called American progressive communism, that power lies with schools and the media. Actually, parents themselves don't quite understand it. Although they feel the social changes are wrong, they can't explain why. They might vote correctly, but they can't explain it to their children, let alone discuss it. So now American socialism, the DSA, is winning more and more districts. They won 3 in New York, then in Colorado, then in Michigan, then in Minnesota, and now they're winning in Florida. By November 3rd, in more and more public and elected positions, American socialism will clash head-on with the Republican Party. Some might say that once they clash, they're bound to lose. Not necessarily. In Michigan, El Sayed's polling at 47-51 against Mike Rogers. I had a viewer leave a comment asking, how can it be 47%? What is wrong with Michigan? Half the people, nearly half, think they should vote for this El Sayed, this kind of person, a socialist Muslim. He asked, are they crazy? He asked, what's going on with these Michigan voters? Of course, one reason is that many people will just vote for whoever the Democratic candidate is, regardless of their views. And second, there are young people who are truly incited by the wealth gap. This is the crisis America is facing now. Is the wealth gap in America the largest in the world? It's definitely not the largest. But if people are incited, it will ignite a fire that is completely out of proportions. So, what should we do? I have a suggestion. This is Feng Wei's commentary. I think we should start in 3 areas: schools, media, and the family. For our viewers, you should look for good schools for your children. They don't have to be Ivy League. You need to find schools with good values. Second, we should read and watch good media, including supporting the growth and spread of good media. I believe my small media outlet, this small channel, spreads correct or good values, so it truly supports making America great. So at this time, if you agree, please subscribe. Take this chance to subscribe to Feng Wei Time and turn on the notification bell, just like it's shown on the screen. And then please like and share this, okay? Anyway, the third area is the family. In the family, you need to understand for yourself what kind of system America has and what is right. Only by understanding it yourself can you influence your children and others. So let me mention again The Naked Communist. Professor Skousen and I collaborated to translate this into Chinese. I believe every viewer should have this 2-volume set on their bookshelf at home. I hope everyone can consider it. I suggest you buy this book. I think reading it will definitely help you, and your children too. Okay, next, let's talk about a very, very, very hot topic. Will Hegseth be fired by Trump? Is U.S. Defense Secretary Hegseth stepping down? Several media outlets are reporting this, led by the Washington Post and the South China Morning Post. The South China Morning Post reports that sources say U.S. Defense Secretary or War Secretary Hegseth is on the verge of losing his job. The report says that Hegseth's risk is rising. What's the reason? 2 reasons. First, the Iran war hasn't made any breakthrough progress. I'm quoting the South China Morning Post here, so it's making Trump angry. Also, another source put it more bluntly, saying Hegseth's position is in danger. Meanwhile, there's a series of negative reports about the U.S. War Department. Also, the living conditions of the crew on the USS Abraham Lincoln are causing growing concern. The carrier's been deployed for 9 months, and the crew faces food shortages and poor sanitation. The Washington Post also said that due to ammo shortages, Hegseth's miscalculation made Trump lose his temper at a cabinet meeting. Okay, it also says U.S. sources state that even if Hegseth leaves, it won't necessarily disrupt improving U.S.-China military ties. Also, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Colby, has been the lead for U.S.-China talks and meets regularly with Chinese defense officials. So according to, I'm still quoting the South China Morning Post here, according to sources familiar with the situation, Chinese officials have a good impression of Colby. Colby stated that Taiwan is not a core interest vital to the survival of the United States. It also says that U.S.-China engagement is going very well. A third source said that unless his successor is a China hawk, it won't have much impact on military contact. Let me interpret this. First, the South China Morning Post has no sources, just sources say, sources say, sources say. If you can write reports like that, I could write them for you every day. Just make up what a source says without any real source. That's the first point. Second, the owner of the South China Morning Post is Jack Ma, right? And Jack Ma's boss is, of course, the CCP. Simply put, Jack Ma is a pawn of the CCP, and so is the South China Morning Post. What do I read into this report? What's the meaning? Two things. First, notice that Xi Jinping has no counterpart for his U.S. visit, as reported 2 days ago. The CCP uses the South China Morning Post to release the messages they want. The first message is that Xi Jinping has no counterpart for his U.S. visit. The second message is today's report, saying public opinion suggests Hegseth can be replaced. And notice, if you replace him, we don't mind, it won't affect us. That's what I'm reading into it. So if you ask for my view, I'd say my current judgment is that's not the case. If the Iran war breaks out and things go wrong, who's to blame? Of course it's Trump's responsibility. Right, he's the commander-in-chief. Hegseth is just the executor. How to proceed with the Iran war is a very major decision, and no one but the president can make it. That's the first point. Second, if something happens to the Lincoln, I don't know how true that is. If such a thing happens, just learn from it. Hegseth is only in his 40s, right? 40 years old. Then just learn from it. What's the big deal? So I don't think this news is true, Of course, let me also clarify, I might be wrong because Trump has his own way of doing things. I might be wrong, and if I am, I'll admit it to everyone. But so far, I haven't seen any reliability in the news regarding this. Even if the Washington Post or the South China Morning Post reported it, it's precisely because the Washington Post and the South China Morning Post reported it that I'd take a second look. Okay, next, let's look at this South Korea. What was the result after Trump criticized South Korea? On Monday, the U.S.-South Korea joint military exercise called Ulchi Freedom Shield was supposed to be held, originally from August 17th to August 27th, 11 days in total, covering drone attacks, GPS signal interference, and cyber attacks. So the result, after Trump spoke yesterday, he said on social media platforms, he said this military exercise is not only costly, but also sends a hostile signal to North Korea. Then he said, Kim Jong-un and I are on good terms, so with me here it's fine, no need to poke him. Also, he mentioned yesterday that he said South Korean President Lee Jae-myung refused to provide help to the U.S. regarding the Iran war. Since you, South Korea, don't support the U.S., then there's no need for the U.S. to do something unfair, so the so-called U.S.-South Korea military exercise will be shortened. As a result, the U.S.-South Korea military exercise ended on August 21st, basically meaning it was supposed to be 11 days, but ended in 4 days. That's the situation. 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, finished in 5 days, cut by more than half. So this is the current result. But the South Korean side relatively showed some softening, but still hasn't bowed. That's the current situation. So how the U.S.-South Korea relationship will develop going forward is a big question, I did a show yesterday with brother Tang Jingyuan, and our views were very, very different. And that show is on Fang Wei's member site, and also on Mr. Tang Jingyuan's member site. So our member site has more and more shows. So if you join the member site, you'll see these shows. And also, Fang Wei and Xin Yan, almost every week, every Saturday, will teach American patriotic songs. And those are all on the member site. Everyone can go in and take a look. And right now it's free to join, free, of course you need to provide a credit card, and then it's free. If there's a charge in the future, it'll be $1.90 a month, $1.99 I guess. All in all, it's also to support Fang Wei's channel, support this kind of media. Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you for your support. I recommend everyone join,